It was the beginning of the 20th century, and it was a time of optimism and hope. The feeling in America was that the future was full of possibilities, and that the next 100 years would be the greatest in history. The population of the United States was a mere 79 million people at the turn of the century, all of them immigrants or children of immigrants. America was a country founded by immigrants, and it would continue to open its doors to millions more in search of the American dream. They would come from everywhere, as far away as Russia and Italy, as close as Mexico and the Caribbean. One in particular came from Cuba. In 1902, a 14-year-old boy arrived by boat in Key West, Florida, on his way to Tampa to join his brothers and sisters who had emigrated there 2 years before. His name was Arturo Fuente. Young Arturo had come from Cuba with nothing in his pockets, but in his heart he had a dream. He could have no idea what lay ahead of him. When Arturo Fuente arrived in Tampa, he settled in the unique and lively community known as Ybor City. Ybor City, founded by a Spanish businessman named Vicente Martinez Ybor, was created in 1885 to support the growing cigar industry in Tampa. Ybor City quickly became a true melting pot, populated by industrious immigrants determined to make a better life for themselves and their families. It was here in this community, full of hope and energy, that Arturo Fuente's own dream of starting a cigar business began to take shape. And sure enough, at age 24, he started a small cigar factory. A. Fuente and Company was established in 1912 to make all Cuban handmade cigars. Within 10 years, Arturo Fuente built his company into a business with 500 employees. The dream of a young Cuban immigrant had become a reality. But then, in 1924, while he was in Cuba buying tobacco, tragedy struck. Arturo Fuente's factory burned to the ground. He lost everything. It seemed as if Arturo Fuente's dream of building a family cigar business had ended. It would be more than 20 years before the seeds of that dream would take root again. Meanwhile, the Fuente family was growing. Arturo and his wife Cristina had one son, Arturo Jr. Then, in 1935, they welcomed their second son. They named him Carlos. Little did they know that their son Carlos would one day take his father's dream to unimaginable heights. In 1946, 22 years after the fire that destroyed his first factory, Arturo Fuente, at age 58, tried to build his dream again. He started the Arturo Fuente Cigar Factory. This time, he opened it in the back of his house.
He started in the back porch, because in the old days, the house had two porches, the front porch and the back porch. And the back porch, I remember, it was a very small place, maybe 10 feet by 16 feet or so forth. And they had we had a toilet. The bathroom was right next to it, connected. So what he did, he closed that and put it part of the factory, and then we made a bathroom outside in the yard. So we struggled, and it was just the whole family really making cigars there. It was my mother, when they came off from work, they used to work for the full day first, and then they used to come. And then at night, they would start making cigars there. Then I had my sister coming over. She made cigars, my uncles, the friends, the neighbors. I mean, it was just a picnic. My mother would be cooking in the kitchen for the whole family. I mean, and it would go on to 12 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12, 1 o'clock at night. Everybody was just nothing but partying.
The home factory was a beehive of activity. From 6 in the morning to midnight, friends and employees populated the house, rolling cigars from tobacco brought in from Cuba. Arturo Fuente was a modest man, and he ran his business in a modest way. He sold his handmade cigars only in the Tampa area, and he sold every box on a cash-only basis. If someone wanted a box of cigars, they came to the house at any hour of the day or night and paid for it. It was as simple as that.
My father was only interested in selling cigars locally. He was not interested in selling cigars out of the state of, out of the city of Tampa, really, because he didn't believe in selling anything on credit. He always felt that if he had left a box, he got paid for it.
While his father struggled to build the family cigar business, young Carlos Fuente would face a struggle of his own. He would have to fight the first of many battles that would confront him throughout his life.
When I was 11, almost 12, I had polio. I got sick one day. I thought I had a digestion because I ate a lot of mangoes, and I was sick for a whole week. And my father was taking me to the family doctor, the clinic, and they said that I had a bad digestion. So as time started going by, I started complaining from my legs. I started complaining. So one night, my father saw that I started complaining that my legs, I can't move my legs, I can't do this. So he got scared and he went down running. It was about midnight. He went to get his friend, which was a family doctor. But he would only bother his friend at the last moment because his friend never charged him money. My father didn't want nothing for nothing. So the doctor came over, and when he saw me, he brought nurses down and they started giving me injection, pilicin injection every 3 hours all night. And then the next morning early, they took the liquor from my spine and they discovered that I had polio, but I was already paralyzed. So naturally, they took me down to the hospital. And then when I was going to the hospital, I didn't even know that I had polio. I didn't know what I was sick from. And when I got to the hospital, then I started seeing a lot of people there, you know, paralyzed and all ages. And I wanted to see my parents, and they told me I couldn't see my parents. So my father, you know, he got permission because we were quarantined. He used to come every day at 10 o'clock in the morning, and they would put me in the window. And my father and I would see him from the third floor down, and he was telling me with tears in his eyes, don't give up, Carlos, be a fighter, you're gonna make it, you're gonna walk. Have faith in me and you're gonna walk. Have faith in me and you're gonna walk. And that's all he used to tell me, that's all. He didn't tell me, how do you feel today? And that's all. I mean, day after day, Carlito, you're gonna walk, Carlito, you're gonna walk. Believe in me, you're gonna walk. And it was a big struggle, but I was determined. I was so determined to walk. And then after I came out, I was a few months, and then I started walking a little bit more, and that I could walk. I mean, I barely made steps, but it took me 2 or 3 years until I started walking more normal. And so it was very tough in those days, and it was very tough for my parents. But they gave me so much support that if it wasn't for them, I would have never made it.
During his teenage years, Carlos Fuente was like any other kid, except for one thing.
My brother and I, we used to come from school, so the first thing that we were taught when we came from school, the first thing we had to do is make cigars. We had to make 50 cigars each, and then we can go out and do the homework, or go out and play whatever we wanted. So it wasn't easy, it was pretty tough, but I used to enjoy it because I liked the business. My brother didn't enjoy it too much, so my brother used to tell me, let's work together so we can make it faster. So we were always arguing back and forth because I didn't want to make it faster, he wanted to make it faster.
In 1953, at age 18, Carlos Fuente married his childhood sweetheart, Ana Lopez, and started his own family. His father's cigar business was generating just enough income to take care of his wife and himself. Carlos Fuente had his own family to support now, so for most of the 1950s, he had to find other work.
When I started with my wife, because we were teenagers when we started going together, then my father-in-law, in those days, bakers were like being doctors, and all the family on my wife's side were all bakers. So when he couldn't get rid of me, because he tried to get rid of me, but he saw that it was that I was really interested, and he couldn't get rid of me, so he decided that I better learn a trade. So he got me a job in a bakery, And a lot of time when I used to come from bakery, sometime when I used to work during the night, just before school, I used to come, and sometimes it was 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. I used to see my father preparing for the work the next day because he had to go and work for somebody else. So he had to prepare work. So I used to see him, and I wouldn't go to bed. I used to start helping my father because I felt bad for him, and then I would go to school.
Little did anyone know, but this young man who was struggling to support his family by making bread and pastries would soon change the cigar world forever. In 1954, Carlos Fuente's wife gave him a son. They named him Carlos Fuente Jr. Like his grandfather and his father before him, little Carlito would have tobacco in his blood, literally.
When my son was born, he was a little thing running around the factory, and he had a problem one time. It was nothing but throwing up. So my wife took him to the doctor one day and said, what's wrong with him? So, well, make a long story short, they found out that his problem was he was getting drunk out of the tobacco because he was constantly inside, the factory was inside the house.
It was 1956. Arturo Fuente, at 68 years of age, asked his son Carlos if he wanted to take over the cigar business.
My father then, he was already over 65 years old, and he was drawing pension. So you couldn't make so much money and still draw a pension, Social Security. So one day he came to me and told me, look, you're the one that worked the factory. You're the one that next to me all the time because my brother's older than me, okay? And at first the factory was in his name, and he decided that my brother had no interest in the factory. So he told me, you want the factory, I'll put the factory in your name. So I told him, well, if you do that, I would take it only under one condition. I would take the factory, but we have to do it legally. I bought it from my brother for $1.
So at age 21, Carlos Fuente quit his job as a baker and went to work in the family business, but doing so meant taking a 50% salary cut. Not easy for a young man with a family to support.
So I went back to my wife and told him, look, we can't live on $40 a week, so you're gonna have to go work. So she told me, okay, I'll go work. So then I went to see an uncle of mine, which he was a manager in another factory. So I went to see my uncle and told him, look, I'm gonna do this. I'm quitting the baker, I'm gonna work for my father, and I need my wife to work for you. So he told me, well, okay, I'll give her a job in the office. She has experience as a secretary. So I told him, no, I don't want my wife to be a secretary. I want her to learn how to make cigars. Someday she's gonna work in a home factory.
44 years after Arturo Fuente first started the business in Tampa, his son Carlos was about to carry on the family tradition. He could have no idea what trials and tribulations lay ahead of him. Carlos Fuente wanted to put his own ideas into practice. His father had always run the business on a cash basis and limited sales to the Tampa area. So Carlos introduced the notion of selling cigars based on credit so he could establish ongoing accounts. Then he set about expanding the market for the Fuente brand outside the Tampa area.
So one day I told him, look, we got to grow. So he told me, what can we do? I said, what would you do? He asked me, what would you do? I said, well, I'll go out and sell. Where will you go? So we got to sell credit. I'll go to Miami. So I started traveling, which without no sales experience, really. I started going out, and I went to Miami, and I opened a distributor there. And that's the way we started growing.
It all worked, and the Arturo Fuente Cigar Company began to grow. But then came the Cuban Revolution in 1959. At first, no one was sure what the implications would be for the American cigar companies who used Cuban tobacco in their blends. And for a few years, the tobacco kept coming. Then in 1962, Carlos Fuente was visiting family in Cuba when it became clear to him that the United States was about to place a complete trade embargo on the Caribbean island. So without telling his father, he bought all the Cuban tobacco he could.
I came back to Tampa, and I told my father, Dad, I got something to tell you. And he said, what? And I told him, sit down. He said, no, tell me. No, you sit down. I did this and that. I bought tobacco. He said, you're crazy. What the hell you know about tobacco? So you don't know anything about tobacco. I said, I bought tobacco because the embargo was going to be It's going to come someday, and we need the tobacco. And he said, but who's going to pay for it? I said, I don't know who's going to pay for it, but we're going to buy it. I already bought it. So sure enough, I bought the tobacco, then we got it. So naturally, we had Cuban tobacco for 3 years. So then I was offered all kinds of money. I remember I paid for those bales at that time, $250 a bale. And then we were offered $1,250, $1,500 a bale. And I used to tell my father, Dad, sell the tobacco, sell the tobacco. He said, no, shut up, you won't dare sell it. So that helped us to stay and maintain the same cigars for another 3 years.
When the Cuban tobacco supply ran out, Carlos and Arturo Fuente experimented with blends of tobacco from other countries until they finally found a blend that met with their satisfaction. The blend was called Flor de Orlando, and even though there wasn't a shred of Cuban tobacco in it, it was a success, and the company continued to grow. But soon the factory was outgrowing its small space in the Fuente home.
We got to a point that we grew our present place, and then I started taking part of my mother's house. I took one of her living room, I took the bedroom, I kept on taking more and more for the house. I remember we had to move all the furniture. I had to move all the furniture out to the street, middle of the street, to do the tobacco blending, the short filler blending. We used to blend all the tobacco, put them all in boxes, then clean everything up, and then put all the furniture back. It was a job.
So Carlos Fuente started looking for a new home for the company. He soon found it, a 2-story building in Tampa. It was the perfect spot, but how to pay for it?
I used to see a building on Ybor City. There was a building, a 2-story building, a 1.5-story building. It was one story. There used to be an old factory there, a small Buckeye, what they call a mom and pop shop. And they had an apartment upstairs. So I told my father, let's go and buy that one. My father told me, I ain't got how to pay for it. We can't buy it. You're crazy. So I told him, I'll get the money. So I knew at that time the expressway was coming through where we were at on 13th Avenue. There was already a lot of talk about it. There was already in the newspaper that the road was coming, the highway was coming there. So I drew up a plan, a blueprint, to build on my mother's house a floor in the top. So I went to the city house and I told them I wanted the permit to build. So they told me okay, so they went to the back office, and a few minutes later they came to see me and said, well, I can't give you a permit. I said, why can't you give me a permit? And they told me, well, because don't you know the high four is going to go through there, and we're going to buy your property out. I said, yeah, but when? He said, well, it could be another year. I said, no, you got a problem. You either buy me now or give me the permit, and later on, when you buy me, you pay me for whatever I spent. No, we can't do that. It's okay, give me the blueprint, I'll go see my attorney. I said, no, wait a minute. So anyway, they bought us out a year before. So we went to the other building.
With the new factory and his determination to grow, Carlos Fuente virtually worked around the clock.
I used to do everything myself. I had to case tobacco, I had to run the place, I had to do everything. I do all my bookkeeping. I was doing everything myself because I couldn't afford to pay more people. So I used to put a lot of hours. And one day I used to sometimes finish working at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. I used to take a shower right there where we wet the case of the tobacco, and I would stay there. I would lay on top of the tobacco bales, and I would sleep there because I had to open at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I'll never forget. I was 3 weeks from coming home. I would call my wife on the phone. That's it. That's all I see my wife and my kids. So one day my wife shows up with Khalid, my son Carlos, in one hand and a bag in the other hand. You don't come home, I'm coming here to live with you.
In 1963, Arturo Fuente retired at the age of 75. Even so, he never left his dream behind. He came to the factory every day to visit and advise his son.
He was a very hard-working man. He was so close to us. He would get along, never got mad, never got upset. He was very close to the family. He was always there for us. And he was just special. He was a very special man.
I remember old Arturo holding me by the hand to the back of his house, full of chickens. Full of chickens in the back of here's a cigar maker who never knew he would become a legend. He never knew his name would become a legend. The most simplest man in the world. You know, my grandfather smoked 20 cigars a day. He woke up with a cigar, went to sleep with a cigar, ate eggs. My grandmother cooked with pork fat. My grandfather raised pork. He was a Cubano. But you know, those days, a man was a man.
The 1970s were a difficult time in the Tampa cigar business. Inflation was rampant. Interest rates were approaching 20%, costs were rising, and business was falling off. To make matters worse, experienced rollers were dying off, and there were few young people willing to take their place. And then, on February 11, 1973, an era ended when Arturo Fuente, the patriarch of the Fuente family, died at the age of 85. As the new patriarch of the Fuente family, Carlos knew that he had some big decisions to make.
It was a time that my grandfather passed on, and my father had to grab the reins and pull the family together. It was a time that we had to struggle as a family and overcome the Cuban embargo. And it came to the point that I remember my father and I speaking that we needed to go somewhere else. We had to search somewhere else where we could make handmade cigars.
Over the next few years, Carlos Fuente manufactured cigars in Puerto Rico and then in Mexico, but ultimately he decided the quality wasn't up to his standards. He even tried to open a factory in the Dominican Republic, but there was too much bureaucracy and a mountain of red tape. Then in 1974, a family friend suggested Carlos try Nicaragua.
In Nicaragua, I went to see this factory. It was an old man, and they had about 500,000 cigars or more, okay? I checked the cigars, I liked the cigars, I liked the way it tasted, burned, and so forth. And I said, okay, I could use them, you know. So I went ahead and bought the whole thing. So I really wanted to buy time, and I needed some handmade cigars. And at the same time, I will be working to try to open someplace else. But I said, okay, so we went in and bought the company.
The Nicaraguan cigars were excellent, and the Fuente brand began to grow again. But then the dream turned into a nightmare. It was early 1978. Political turmoil was building in Nicaragua. Sandinista guerrillas were months away from seizing the national palace in the capital city of Managua. Nicaragua was in a state of social and political upheaval. Carlos Fuente was there as the situation grew more and more dangerous.
One morning I was having breakfast. They had a little restaurant right there in the motel. So I was having my breakfast, and I heard a conversation in back of me. Some people that was talking, that they just came from Managua. So I turned around, I told them, excuse me, yeah, did I hear you just came from Managua? And they say, yes. And I told them, how was the road? He said, fine, everything was fine, quiet, no strike, no shooting, no, everything was fine. So I just got up, I went to the front desk, I told them, fix my bill, I'm leaving. I went to my room, I got my clothes, threw them in the bag, I rented a car and left. When I got to the airport, it was a total mess. I told myself, what the hell I'm doing here? I don't know where I was going. I didn't have no tickets. I went over there and said, I want to buy a ticket to Miami. It's no, everything is booked. We don't know what time it's going to leave. Anyway, make a long story short, well, I had to give some money. I gave some money. The first one that I gave to him, nothing happened. Then I went back. I couldn't see the guy, so I had to struggle a few people before I got it, but I got on the plane. I came home. And the next day at midnight, they called me. Everything is lost. We got burned out. Everything is lost. I never went back.
It was 1978. And Carlos Fuente found himself with no factory and few cigars to sell. He quickly recovered by partnering with a tobacco grower to make cigars in Honduras. But within the year, another tragedy struck.
And I remember one day we got a call. It wasn't about a revolution this time. Accidental fire, the factory's burned down. Our hopes are gone. It's gone, second time. Where are you gonna go? Central America's in the middle of a revolution. You got the Sandinistas, you got the Contra Sandinistas, the world's falling apart. Where the hell are you gonna go? You gonna go back to the United States, where there's 20-something% interest? Where are you gonna go?
Was this a sign? Was it bad luck? Or was this a test? Carlos Fuente was facing a major turning point in his life.
I said, that's it, I'm quitting. I can't take this thing no more. So I told my son, look, we have to do something. I think we still got a pretty good business, and the machine-made business, but it's not what I like to do, and I want to know what your feeling is.
We're sitting in a restaurant, and we're speaking. Says, we tried. And we spoke, and we asked each other, we have a great opportunity. Everybody wants to buy us out. At that time, there were big companies taking advantage of the turmoil. They want to buy you out. This was my experience. And my father says, how do you feel? He says, I'm not going to sell. How do you feel? I said, Papa, this is my life. He said, that's all I want to hear.
So I told him, well, you know that we're broke. Almost broke. So the only thing we can do is I have to move. And if we go back, if we go to any foreign country, it has to be the family. I don't want no more partners. I don't want to have to deal with anybody else. So he told me, whatever you want, Dad.
Carlos Sr. and his son Carlito decided to give it one last try, this time in the Dominican Republic. Carlos Sr. had been sending Carlito to the Dominican Republic on and off for years to learn about growing tobacco, so they were both very familiar with the country.
When my son was a teenager, I used to send him to the Dominican Republic to work with the growers, because I wanted him to learn what it really was to grow tobacco, because when I started the business, I started in the factory and not in growing tobacco, which is another aspect. It's totally different. I can get tobacco, I know what to do with it, because that's what I was taught. But I wanted my son to go a little further than I did in my time.
I was hungry. I was the child that wanted to please my father. I was so hungry. I went out there and I wanted to learn. I wanted to take it to the next level.
Moving the entire operation from Tampa to the Dominican Republic meant leaving everything behind and starting all over again. And to make matters worse, money was very scarce.
I went to see my wife. I told my wife, look, we're going to move to Dominican. So she told me, but we're going to leave everything we got. I had just built a new home, which was paid for. We were living there 10 years. And I told her, we're going to go, and it'll be a short time. It'll be maybe 3 or 4 years until I get the factory going, then we'll come back home. So I told her, I'll go ahead first, and I'll start, and then you come with my youngest son.
We didn't want to leave our home. That was our home. We didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave. I never imagined in my life that I would ever live outside of Tampa. That's my home. That's my grandfather's home. That was my father's home. Never imagined it.
The decision to move was made. But to finance it, Carlos Fuente had to cash in his retirement plan and mortgage his house. He didn't know for sure it would even work. But that didn't stop him. On January 1980, he arrived in the Dominican Republic.
And first I lived in a hotel. Then I couldn't afford the hotel anymore. So I moved to a boarding house, one room. I had one room. The bathroom was about half a mile long. I had to walk all the way out there to go to the bathroom. And it was a one-room apartment.
My father, all alone, came to the Dominican Republic without knowing anyone and started searching, researching where he was going to build a factory.
I bought a car when I first came here. I bought a car, a 1980 Datsun, which I still have. And I would not there's no money in the world can buy that car from me. I said, when it doesn't go no more, I'm gonna climb in the top of the building.
And I remember he used to call me up every day. He says, look, there's a building that's very small, but it's too big for us. And they're making clothing there, but they're having financial problems. And he's called me up, he says, you know, if I can make this deal and everything, I'll make it work. I don't know how the hell I'm gonna pay for it, but if I can make this deal, maybe we can make it work. And, you know, but going back, my father asked me, what do you have? I said, Dad, I got $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. It's enough. You wanna come in? We'll go partners.
It took 8 months of government red tape, but on September 4th, 1980, the first Dominican Arturo Fuente cigar factory opened in the city of Santiago.
All of a sudden, the old Fuente tradition transformed into another Fuente tradition. Our life started to change. We're here. We're hungry. We have lost everything. As father and son, we have walked together. We have fallen together. We have skinned our knees together. Nicaragua, Honduras, Tampa, Ybor City, but now this is survival. We're hungry.
We started with 7 people. My wife was in the office, my youngest son was helping me in the factory, and myself. Carlito started coming here because the company started growing. And I needed help. Then he started helping me, and then my daughter Cynthia, she came out of college, she started being more into sales end. She started going out selling, traveling, selling, which she was a pretty good sales lady at that time.
I was accepted as though I was not a girl, as though I was one of them. I was right along with my brothers learning about tobacco. I was right along with them in every aspect of the business. So they never separated me because I was a girl. I was part of the family. Cigar business is considered a man's world, but yet women have been there all along. In the producing of cigars, women rolled cigars as well as men, or they worked in the machines. My grandmother was along with my grandfather. My mother was there with my father. So incidentally, there was always women in the industry. But as a whole, we think of it as a man's world. But women have always been there. Women have enjoyed cigars as well.
Over the decade of the 80s, the business grew, and the Fuente brand quickly became one of the best known in the world. Meanwhile, Carlito was learning more and more about tobacco growing and blending. He was beginning to get some big ideas of his own. Then one fateful day in 1988, a visitor to the factory said something to Carlito that shook him to the very core of his being.
And I had a group of visitors visiting us, and one gentleman, a very well-known tobacconist, known worldwide, from Paris, France. After visiting our factories, says, my God, Carlito, says the quality controls, the passion, the love that you see among the cigar makers. He says it's unique. I have not witnessed this anywhere in the world. He said, but you're never going to be great. You're never going to be the best because you don't produce a cigar. You assemble a cigar.
And that got to my son. And that's what all started, that he thought about making a 100% Dominican tobacco cigar.
Carlito knew that the next step in the evolution of the Fuente brand was to create cigars, not just assemble them. What he didn't know was that, like his father before him, he was about to change the cigar business forever. The next year, in 1989, Carlito convinced his father to let him try to do what no one had been able to do before, grow wrapper tobacco in the Dominican Republic.
And when I heard they said that you cannot grow wrappers, I asked myself, why not? Why not? I said, this is it. Why not? You know what they told me? They told me you can't grow great wrappers in the Dominican Republic. You have to grow great wrappers in Cuba because the soils are blessed in Cuba. Soils are blessed. Soil doesn't grow great tobacco alone. It's human beings that grow great tobacco.
So one day I told him, well, if you want to grow wrapper in this country, you know, everybody say it cannot be done. And I don't see why it can't be done. And you know how I feel about can't. As far as I'm concerned, there's nothing you can't do if you really put your mind to it. But if you have to do it and you want to do it, there's only one way to do it. You gotta go all the way. You gotta really devote yourself more than you even have up to now.
Carlito's dream was to make something different, something never before available. An all-Dominican cigar of extraordinary quality. But could he do it?
We were doing real good. We had no reason why experiment with anything else. That's why I thought my son was crazy at first when he came with the idea, because I mean, here we are growing. We just built another factory when all business, cigar business was going down. Everybody was complaining, everybody wanted to sell, and we were still growing. So I thought it was first crazy, but after I saw the possibility that this farm had, I knew that my son was going to come out with something that it was beyond our dreams.
In the beginning, Carlito jokingly called the undertaking Project X from Planet 9. The end result turned out to be anything but a joke. The first wrapper tobacco was grown in 1992 at their tobacco farm outside Santiago called Chateau de la Fuente. After aging for 3 years, the first all-Dominican cigar was released in November 1995. It was called the Fuente Opus X, and it was a sensation. Because of the new magazine, The Cigar Aficionado, an unprecedented boom in cigar popularity had begun. Nowhere was it more evident than in the overwhelming demand for the Fuente Opus X.
When we started this project, a lot of people smoked the cigar that Carlito would give it to. And when it got rated in Cigar Aficionado, and it did very, very well, back in that time, there were very few cigars from the Dominican Republic that were rated as high as the Fuente Opus X was rated, because Cubans were rated very high at that time. And so the magazine really had such an influence on the demand, creating the demand for the product, because obviously of the rating, it did so well. And a gentleman came down and did a story on the farm. So these things were done prior to being released.
The Fuente Opus X was so popular with consumers that the demand quickly surpassed the supply of cigars. To this day, the production of the Fuente Opus X is limited to only 750,000 cigars per year.
Expectations for this cigar are through the roof. So when someone gets a Fuente Opus X cigar and smokes it, I mean, you know, the reputation of the family is on the line, per se. So could we make more? We could probably make more. Could we make them as good as we make them now? No. We could make more, but they wouldn't be as good. Could we age them less? Yeah, but they wouldn't be as good. So we're not about making more and the bottom line, to be honest with you. We're more about just making the absolute best cigar that we can make. And this is one of the greatest cigars in the world.
The Fuente family was now producing some of the most desirable and famous cigars ever made. But success often breeds animosity, and in 1996, after decades of struggle and hard work, they were hit with one of their most trying challenges ever. The makers of a California wine called Opus 1 sued the Fuente family for trademark infringement for their new cigar, the Fuente Opus X.
I just couldn't believe it, that we were going to be sued for something that I knew that was rightfully ours, that we had built. So when I first got the letter of decease, my son came to me, and my response was, they're crazy, go for it. Whatever it takes, go for it. Because I can't believe that somebody's going to take something that's rightfully us. It was very emotional, it was very tough, but that's something that we had to do. That's something I have to do because it was rightfully ours.
We lost everything after the embargo. We lost everything to fires. We lost things in the revolution, and we lost it everything. But you know what? We haven't lost our integrity. When we were challenged, we felt our principles and our integrities were challenged. It didn't matter whether we won or lost. What really mattered is that how we walked out of it with our heads up.
I couldn't accept it. There's no way I would accept it. And I told my son, even though if we lose everything, it's whatever it takes. I mean, I remember I was born without nothing, I start again without nothing. And I never got scared about that. It was just our honor that was being defended, touched, and we had to go with it. And that's what we did. And we proved that we were right.
The Fuentes won that lawsuit, and their family honor was preserved. But then, in 1998, nature dealt them another blow. Its name was Hurricane George. It was a Category 3 hurricane, and it hit the Dominican Republic with winds of up to 130 miles an hour. The damage to Chateau de la Fuente was devastating.
I remember the day that the storm, we couldn't get in touch here, the phones or nothing. So my son and I came down at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we had to abandon the car in the highway because we couldn't cross to the farm. So we walked down, all the trees were down, everything down. And when I first came into this farm and I saw oil barns, I think we had about 19 barns, tobacco barns, and there was 17 down on the floor, if I recall. So I remember I told my son, I guess this is a word from God. This is it. I mean, we've gone through so much already. And I told my son that, and my son looked at me and said, Dad, what you gone through, you mean to tell me you were ready to quit now? You must be getting old. I said, Carlito, what do you think? He said, we'll make it better. So I said, okay, we'll make it better. It was tough. I think for the first time in my life that after everything that I've gone, I thought this was just a message. This is it. But I guess my son being with me so long that he figured that with everything that I've gone through in the past, that this will not stop him. And it didn't.
Carlos Fuente came as close as he's ever been to giving up. But he and Carlito ultimately refused to surrender, and they rebuilt Chateau de la Fuente into something even grander than it had once been. Today, it is one of the most beautiful tobacco farms in the world. Over the past 10 decades, the Fuente family has had to overcome obstacle after obstacle. What they did is nothing short of astonishing. On the surface, none of it should have worked, and for an ordinary family, it wouldn't have. But the Fuente family is no ordinary family.
I think more that it was determination. We slept, ate, dreamed, played, worked, nothing but tobacco. And I mean, we had a lot of bad times, and but we just overcome it. We overcome it. We just look further out, and keep on trying.
The Fuente family has been in the cigar business for almost a century. 3 generations of passionate cigar makers. Throughout it all, their constant beacon of purpose and strength has been the family. The dream of a humble immigrant from Cuba at the turn of the century had come true. 100 years later, the Fuente family joins the ranks of the other great families in the world whose name stands for the very best the world has to offer.
Wherever we go, we take our name with us. And we do represent our name and our family, but it's just what we feel in our hearts, like I say, and it just makes it all so easy. My father has always said, life is what you make it. And when you do something you enjoy, then it's all natural, and that's the way we feel.
I think when my father-in-law has his entire family eating at one table, that is his happiest moment. With the grandchildren running around and his 2 sons there, his daughter, his wife, there is no question in my mind that is the happiest my father-in-law is.
The family to us is very, very important, just being around loved ones. But like I said, it's being around people you love. To me, that's what life is all about.
We're all one. There's no separation between my father, my sister, my entire family. We're all one. I was taught that way.
There's no words really to express it. I mean, it's something that I dream of. I always prayed that someday that I would have in my own family the same thing that I had in my parents' family when we were growing up, and I think that it was accomplished, if not beyond.